Hello, hello. Is it still there? Okay. Good. I just need to speak up a little bit. You guys got to enjoy this morning my friend Joey. And, I'm a blessed lady to have wonderful people surround me in what I get to do in Longview, Texas, and among other places. And so I like to show them off. And I loved his talk this morning. I didn't introduce myself completely last night. So I told you I had 4 kids, which I do. I also have a husband that we're about to celebrate 36 years of marriage. And he is back home. His name is David. A wonderful man that, it's never an easy thing to be married for 36 years, right? But it's been a delight to walk this life and stumble through, as I was saying last night, sloshing through. And he's a steady, wise man for me. So he texted me right before I came in and said, he had talked to me earlier and said, "You sound really tired." I said, "I am tired." And he texted me and just said, "I love you." That's all he said. And I thought, first I went, "Well, are you praying?" Then I went, he's loving me. That's good. I like that. Tomorrow morning, you're going to have the opportunity to... I also have 7 grandchildren. I'm sorry. I have to tell you that. 7 beautiful grandchildren. They're pretty wonderful, too. So they call me Nana, and they call David Boss. So it is Nana and Boss. So tomorrow, you're going to have the opportunity to take a 3x5 card. And you can start doing it today, actually. We'd love for you to do that. Write out any questions you might have. I'm going to put Joey up here, and he's going to have all your answers. And so, but we'd love to engage with those questions. That's kind of what we want to do tomorrow. The other thing, too, is that we'd love to hear from you. So as whatever God has stirred, you remember I asked you last night, it feels like 3 days ago, but it's really just been last night, right? So I asked you last night, what do you hope for? What do you think God hopes for? What is he wanting? There's a couple of questions I asked. And where are you? Was the third one, I think. And so I think tomorrow I'd love to hear from you. What's been happening in your small group? What's happening when you're sitting in your room by yourself? What are you going to be leaving with? What's stirring in you? I think that matters. And so, it's no pressure to talk tomorrow. But I think that's a way that we do Hebrews 10, where we one another each other. And we say, keep going. Don't stop getting together. And I think that's the idea of how to encourage each other. So just want to encourage you to be thinking about that. Also, I just want to say thank you to Tiffany for the worship. It's been really good. Laura, back here, and I can say all this again tomorrow. I just thought I could do it twice. And then Marion back there put all this together, you guys. And when there's a problem, she's on it. I've watched her in action, and that goes a long way. Well, there's a lot of material today. I just was realizing that as I was putting it up on the board. So the clock is gone.
What was wrong?
So
You got my phone?
I'll get my phone over here somewhere, so I don't just keep on talking. And how long do we have for this one? How many? 10 hours? 3 hours. Okay, Joey said 3 hours. Marion is looking.
I'm looking.
It's all right.
We're supposed to go on break at 3:45.
Okay, so a little less than an hour. Yeah, all right. Well, we're going to talk about today, blessed are the meek, meekness and being a peacemaker. And I have up here, somewhere around here, to be compelled by love, because I feel like that's kind of the direction that all these Beatitudes are going in. The idea of sitting with Christ on this mountain and listening to him talk. And he's inviting us to be part of what he's about, his kingdom, and saying it's all compelled by love. Again, I'll say over and over again that as we talk about the idea of being poor in spirit, we talk about mercy. Joey talked about lament this morning and did such a good job on that. You know, those things are opened up to enter. Those things are opened up to enter as you enter your story, as you engage in your story, as you're free to move forward, because the gospel is all about freedom. But places that you haven't talked about, or places that you're stuck, or places that feel like they have a power that's just kind of hanging over you, that's not freedom. But I think he wants to free you. He wants to free you to weep, to lament over loss, harm, and hurt. He wants to free you to be able to offer mercy and to receive mercy. We're not always good at receiving. And to be poor in spirit and not feel threatened by that when it's mocked. But that comes at a price, and part of that price, but part of that freedom as well, seems to work that way with Christ, is entering that story and engaging it and lamenting it, places that it needs to lament and mourning. You know, when Jesus said, "Blessed are those who are meek," that day, my guess is that that was a surprise statement to them. Remember last night when I was talking about the idea of the Roman Empire, the Sadducees, the Pharisees, the church throughout the centuries, they weren't really talking about meekness in that culture. And so when people, instead, they're out there fighting and they're out there trying to look a certain way and perfect personas and making sure people thought they were competent. And they're the highest of the religious section of people. That's what they seem to be spending the energy on. And then Jesus stands and says, "Blessed are those who are meek." Because they inherit the whole earth. I just love that. They inherit the whole earth. I put up here, and I know some of you cannot see it, so I'm going to read it to you over here. I put up here meekness. I thought, let's talk about what meekness is when he says that. Here's a few of my thoughts. I think oftentimes meekness is seen as weakness. You heard the doormat kind of scenario. I wonder what, often have sat and thought, if I was watching Jesus live in front of me those days and watching him interact with people, would I think he's a weak man? What would I think? But sometimes that's how meekness is seen, is weakness. It also is the idea that of unimportance, being unimportant. When I think of that, I think of the blind man in John 9. You know that story where people are saying, who sinned? Him? His parents? Why is he blind? They're trying to explain the fact of suffering. You ever tried to explain suffering, by the way? It's a hard one, huh? Can't really explain that. Think of the hemorrhaging woman who was hemorrhaging for 12 years in Matthew 9. One of my favorite stories, where she just wants to touch the hem of Jesus' garment. I think of the sinful woman, Luke 7. What courage she had to walk into a room full of Pharisees and weep, lament, be grateful, all of it. Because see, I think when you lament, it opens up gratefulness. I think of the lame man in John 5, 38 years, and Jesus comes to him and says, "Do you want to be well?" You ever wonder why Jesus asked that? This is a tangent. I like that story too. And I always thought, Jesus, why are you asking that? Of course, he always confuses me. So why are you asking that question, Jesus? Of course he wants to be well, right? But I sat with it, months and months, thinking the question bothered me. And I think Jesus was asking him, do you want to be well? Because it's costly to move in to your story. It's costly to change, to let God shift the Spirit to change you. It affects community. It affects family. It affects you. Maybe that's what he was asking. Do you want to be well? You know, Jesus seldom describes himself in Scripture. But when he does, and I think Joey referred to this earlier today, but in Matthew 11, where he does, he says that he is meek and lowly. And I think that's the highest virtues if you think about that. If I'm going to be a disciple of him, that's what I want to be able to say. I can't say that. Hopefully I'm moving in that direction to say that. But I would want to be able to say that. And you think about that, and it's, I love that Jesus, he identifies himself with the unimportant. You ever thought about that? He could have said, what could he have said? Many things, right? I'm the Son of God. I always wonder, why didn't he get a t-shirt that said, I'm the Son of God? I'm powerful. I can zap you. Instead, he says, I'm lowly and meek in heart. How about you? When you think of meekness, when I think of meekness, would people use that word for you? Is that how they would describe you? And if you think about it, it's dangerous to be weak. To be meek. I'm going to talk about what it is here in just a second. But it's dangerous when you think about it, to be meek. You guys are looking at me like, how's that dangerous? Yes, absolutely. Target, vulnerable, looked at as weak. But what I think it is it's open to submission. It's open to submit. And it's to submit to something bigger than myself. It's teachable. It's willing to listen. Sometimes as, leaders, we get so quick to speak, to teach, instead of being open to submit. One of my favorite long-time Bible stories is Moses. And I think of him because he obviously was known as the meekest man on earth, right? But I think he submitted. See, most people just remember, I'm not sure why we're getting feedback, but we okay back there? Most people think of him as just, if you remember how much he protested and asked questions. I think he protested this 9 times. And God, at one point, got angry with him, of course. I am who I am, Moses. But there's something else to see in that I think sometimes we miss. First of all, don't be afraid of the struggle, the wrestling. There is a struggle when God's asking something of us. But I think he admitted and recognized his inadequacy too. I don't often hear that from leaders. I don't often hear them talk about their inadequacy. He was aware of his lack, I believe. You read Exodus 3, 4, 6. He says, who am I to be the one chosen? I'm clumsy when I speak. I don't have words. I think sometimes we try to overcome inadequacy. We don't speak about it, but we know it inside. What God asks me to do, I feel so inadequate to do. I want to give him every reason why I'm really not the right one. I'm not the right one to speak. I'm not the right one to write a book. I'm not the right one to lead a counseling center. I'm not the right. I just keep on going, right? I sound like Moses, except I have more than 9. But somewhere in there, we try to overcome the inadequacy, either by getting bigger, by perfecting personas, by trying to prove myself to you instead of just showing up the way I am, which is why I asked that question last night. Where are you tonight when you come in here? Eugene Peterson says this, and I often just read this to myself. He says, one of the surest signs of doing what he has called us into is the inadequacy we feel. I'll read that one more time. One of the surest signs of doing what he has called us into is the inadequacy we feel. And that doesn't just mean where you're leading in ministry. It can mean a husband moving toward his wife. I don't have very many men say, I feel so adequate to know what to do with this woman. I haven't had that very many times. Or I haven't had women come and say, I feel so adequate to know how to show beauty in response to my husband, my strong man. I don't hear that very often either. So it can be across the board. It can be in your ministry. It can be in relationships. It can be in different places. Often, too, you hear people who are in some kind of leadership that talks in superlatives. And I think I'm either just too old and cranky. I don't know exactly what reason, but it's hard for me to listen to that. It's hard for me to listen to, I got something in the mail not long ago about going to a conference that said 5 ways to de-stress your life, guaranteed. I went, I guess you shoot me, because I don't know how you do that on this side of heaven, right? It's like, it's so guaranteed. Or you hear a speaker talk about how they've overcome this and how they've overcome that and how their marriage is great and perfect and all their kids grew up and it's just what they thought when they held them in that nursery. And it's hard for me to listen to that because it doesn't feel like it doesn't feel like they're willing to show us who they really are. I'm not saying good things can't happen with your kids and your marriage and your ministry and the whole thing. Of course it can. There's a lot of good things in my life. But the realness is this life is hard. And God takes us down roads, John 21, that we wouldn't choose otherwise. We think we have it planned, but it doesn't always go like that. I often like to think about when I hire counselors, I wonder sometimes if they come in with their resumes, or anybody at Hope Road, they'll come in with their resumes. And of course, I've done this too. We all do this. We have all these letters by our name, and some are doctors and some are MA, and they got 3 MAs and whatever it is. And then they got all these other letters. When you're a counselor, you got all these other things. And they tell me what classes they specialized in. And I just want to ask them, and I do often, is tell me where you struggle. What hasn't gone well for you the last 5 years? We don't present ourselves that way, do we? I wonder why that is. I wonder if there's a place in being meek that would ask for that. I wonder what it'd be like if we led out of our failures, inadequacies, fears. Not only is it open to submit, but meekness is also relational. And I have intentional up there, intentional about relationships. Again, Moses, he wrestled. I'm going to grab my Bible here and read out of here some. He relates in meekness the way he leads people. As you guys know, in Exodus, the Israelites, I'm not sure they were lamenting. I think they were whining. And there is much of a difference, I believe. They were complaining is another word I would use. And just as all those protests Moses had, remember how patient God was with him, right? And then Moses gets the opportunity to do the same thing. And I'm going to pick up here in Exodus 14. I think that's what I have down there for you guys. Yeah, Exodus 14. As Pharaoh approached, so all of Pharaoh's people are coming. His army is coming to overcome the Israelites in Exodus 14. As Pharaoh approached, the people of Israel looked up and panicked when they saw the Egyptians overtaking them. They cried out to the Lord, and they looked at Moses. And they said, "Why did you bring us out here to die in this wilderness? Weren't there enough graves for us in Egypt? What have you done to us now, Moses? Why did you make us leave Egypt? You made us leave Egypt. Didn't we tell you this would happen while we were still here in Egypt? We said, leave us alone. Let us be slaves to the Egyptians. It's better to be a slave in Egypt than a corpse in the wilderness." But Moses looked at the people and he said, "Don't be afraid. just stand still. Just stand still and watch the Lord rescue you today. This is the same man that protested 9 times, remember? You can hear his formation beginning. It had already begun by shepherding sheep, but it was still beginning or going. The Egyptians you see today will never be seen again. The Lord himself will fight for you. Just stay calm, he said. So not only does it relate to others, but he also was unedited with God in those 9 protests. Remember that. As Joey was saying that today, remember that when he was just saying, you just take where you are and what you are and you take it up. I think he walked this way and he walked to you and he said, and you lay it right there. Well, that's what Moses does. You know, he just protests over and over again. I don't think he's quietly just talking like this to Jesus, to God. I think he's really saying, this is where I am. This is what I'm afraid of. This is what I can't do. I'm not the right person. And so there's an uneditedness with God. But there's also a receiving. So meek folks are willing to receive. It's real important. Again, as leaders, we don't receive very well often. And I think that can easily be a prideful reason, fearful reason. But this is a side note too. I think the way we receive has everything to do with the quality of what we give out. I'll say that again. The way we receive has everything to do with the quality of what I give out. So in Exodus 17, you see Moses receiving here. You guys know the story probably where he has to keep his arms up for the Israelites to win the... And it says this, Moses' arms soon became tired. He could no longer hold them up. So Aaron and found a stone for him to sit on. Then they stood on each side of Moses holding his arms up, his hands up. And they steadied him until sunset. You guys know the rest of the story. But again, there's a willingness for him to receive there. Not only there, but in 18, where he talks to Jethro. Do you remember that story? Jethro's like, Moses, you're carrying way too much, bro. Whatever he called him, right? You can have some help. It's okay to ask for help. He says, select some people. And after you select them, then appoint them. And then he goes on to say this, they will help you carry the load, Moses, making the task easier for you. If you follow this advice and if God commands you to do so, then you will be able to endure the pressures and all these people will go home in peace. So how do you and I receive? How do you receive? What do you think is so hard about receiving? I think, too, one of the other ways it's hard to receive is when somebody puts the searchlight on you and exposes your sin. The story I love there is John 4 with the woman at the well, which I won't go into, but I just know that when my sin has been exposed, I don't run into town and tell everybody and have them come back and meet the person who's exposed me and ask him if he'll stay and spend some more time with us. But there's something refreshing about that story. Because the times that people who dearly love me have exposed things about me, I want to know that. Because I long to be just a little more like Christ with each gray hair that I get. So not only is it submission and about relationships, but it's also about, where do I have that? Helping the kingdom flourish. The kingdom come is what I have up there. And I have down here, kingdom flourish. What does that look like? What's it look like to delight in seeing another person flourish? I have Numbers 14 up there. Let's see. That's where Moses intercedes. I can't see the board. Moses intercedes for the Israelites there, where God's going to wipe them out. Do you guys remember that? I won't read all these to you, but that's where he's wanting to stand in the gap there for them. And then Deuteronomy 3. I am going to read you that one. I love this one because this is where it's kind of, you wonder why. I have Deuteronomy 3 and Deuteronomy 30 that you can look at later. But that's basically, he's talking to Joshua. This is where God tells him, you're not going in to the promised land. On some levels, don't you think it's kind of harsh? You gotta go, Lord, why can't he go in there? I think that. And then he pleads with Lord, please let me go in. He goes, no, I'm going to let you see it from a distance, but you're not going to cross over to go in there. But what you find in, Deuteronomy 3 and 30, what you find there, just make sure I got that right, was Moses being an older man to a younger man. And again, he's not taking it out on him. Most of the times when I've been hurt or I've got my feelings hurt or I get denied something, I don't go see how I can care for another person. But God really tells him, I want you to help him go. I want you to mentor him. And so you read in Deuteronomy 3, he tells Joshua, he says, do not be afraid, Joshua, the nations there. For the Lord your God, he will fight for you. And then God goes on, he says, you commission Joshua and encourage him and strengthen him. For he will lead the people across the Jordan. And then you flip over, and I won't go over there just because of the sake of time, I think. But if you go over to Deuteronomy 30, you see him doing that. He continues to teach all the people until he gets ready to die. And then he commissions Joshua in. And he's really for him because he had a higher purpose to serve than getting his own way. And I think that's what meekness does. It has a higher purpose to serve. And then the fourth thing I think meekness is that it assumes last instead of first. In Genesis 13, if you guys remember the story of Abram and Lot, you read that story and it is, I'm not quite sure what to call it because in one moment Abram is worshiping and building altars. Do y'all remember that? That's in 12, Genesis 12. He's worshiping, he's building altars, and then he's lying. He's afraid. And so he says, it's Sarai's his sister. And then finally Pharaoh finds out all that's happening, and he says, get out of here, take all of your stuff and go. And then it gets you to chapter 13. And in chapter 13, he gets there. He's very wealthy. Lot's very wealthy at this point. And they get ready to go. And they realize that the land that God has promised them is not going to be able to hold both of them. And I'm in 13:5. And it says, Lot, who was traveling with Abram, had also become very wealthy with flocks of sheep and goats and herds and cattle and many tents. But the land could not support both Abram and Lot with all their flocks and herds. So disputes broke out between the herdsmen of Abram and Lot. And finally, Abram said to Lot, let's not allow this conflict to come between us or our herdsmen. After all, we are close relatives. Little peacemaking going on, right? But I want you to listen to how he entered it. Because when we talk on peacemaking in just a minute, it's about entering. It's not about avoiding. Abram says, as the whole countryside is open to you, Lot, you take your choice of any section of the land you want, and then we will separate. If you want the land to go to the left, then I'll take the land and go to the right. And if you prefer the land on the right, then I'll go to the left. Again, meekness has something to do with being willing to be last and not first. I think of all the times that I don't do that. If I'm hungry, I jump in line. If there's one thing left, do I take it? If I'm driving and I need to get out, I need to get out. I think about that. Just little things, daily things. But am I willing to be last and not first? Meekness is not natural to us, and it can only be produced, like I said last night, from the Spirit. There is an absence of pride when we're meek. There's not a promotion of self or position or privilege. The meek are humble people who restrain from power that they've been given in order to promote another's well-being. Think about that. We've all been given some kind of power. Do we allow it to be restrained for another person's well-being? They don't live entitled. These folks recognize that they're blessed and they live poor in spirit, and they lament. They lament loss. Andrew Murray says this. Another word for meekness he talks about is to be humble. And Andrew Murray, in his old book about humility, said this: humility and true holiness in the spirit are intimately related. The great test of whether the holiness we profess to seek or to attain is truth and life will be whether it produces an increasing humility in us. I'll read it one more time. Humility and true holiness in the spirit are intimately related. The great test of whether the holiness we profess to seek or to attain is truth and life will be whether it produces an increasing humility in us. So that creates a question. Is there an increasing humility in me? I like to use the phrase humble confidence. I wonder, if I can, because I want to live like a humble, confident lady because of who I know. I'm a daughter of the King, and I know I'm so loved. Meek people inherit the land. I want to read what Amy Jill Levine says about that. She says, inheriting the earth or the land is not a windfall. It is a responsibility. To be the heir of something means that we have been giving something that's treasured. Only the meek, those who would not use the inheritance to reinforce their own already privileged position, are worthy to care for this land. They understand stewardship. They understand restriction of activity. And they understand their responsibility in turn to pass the land to others. Also, when you get a chance, take a look at Psalm 37 about inheriting the land. It says, it's the meek that will inherit the land and will delight in abundance. It's not only to be meek in humility, but what does it look like to be a peacemaker? Now tell me what you guys think. It's this afternoon, so I'm going to wake you up for a minute. I know the sun, I'm feeling it on my back. I can't see the board, so I'm dodging it here. But when you think of peacemaker, tell me some words that you guys think of. Gentle, that's a good one. Listener, arbitrator, okay, yeah. Listener, gentle, arbitrator, mediator, negotiator, reconciler, that's a good one too, yeah. What did you? Courageous, wow, that's good too. Yeah, I think y'all are right. I think it's what y'all all said, is that in order to be all those things, gentle, conquerors, I can't remember what all was said, but the idea that if that's the case, it is an entrance of your story in order to be able to offer that to people. But I love too the second part of that, right? Do you remember what that second part is? Peacemakers are called children of God. Huh. That's pretty powerful, because I want to be a child of God. So I think so often, though, it gets misconstrued for something, which is a lack of conflict, right? So we go into something and we think that being a peacemaker means there's no conflict. Well, first of all, you're never going to be a peacemaker if you don't enter the conflict. Just a side note. That doesn't always mean that you speak. Doesn't always mean that you're silent. Doesn't always mean that you go in with your armor on. You have to kind of seek the Spirit and try to tag along with where He's leading you in that. But it does mean that there's a willingness to enter conflict. One of the things that's just amazing when you think about from Genesis to Revelation, that God is always moving into conflict. You ever notice that? And I think He does it because He's coming for us. He wants us. He loves us. But you don't see Him shrink back. And I think becoming a peacemaker means I got to be willing. And I have up here, you can't see it, but I have, it's not the absence of conflict, but it is getting in the mess. I find that people don't like messy situations. And even myself, there's times I go, knowing that it's there. As opposed to saying, I have another opportunity to make him look good. There's that. Not only is it getting in the mess, but it's about risk. It's about risk taking. Because have you ever noticed that a lot of peacemakers will say they're not always liked? And we're getting to that part of chapter 5, is they're not always liked. There's a, they cause dissension, not just calm, lack of conflict kind of situation, right? The other thing that I think of when I think of peacemaking is forgiveness. And there's 2 stories that I had, and Sharon, I think you prompted me to tell one of them that I wasn't going to tell, but I'm going to tell that one. But one of them is Paul, Barnabas, and Mark. You guys remember that story where Paul's going on a mission journey? I won't read it again right now, and he asks Barnabas to bring Mark, or Barnabas asks if he can bring Mark, and Paul says, no way. So now think about this, okay? You're on a mission trip, let's just say, and you're out there and you're doing what you're doing in the hot and the sun, and you're kind of sweaty, and maybe you're building a house, maybe you're doing missions for, medical missions or whatever. And somebody says, I am too hot. This is too hard. This is hard stuff. And they're on the mission trip with you. I'm going home. That's kind of what Mark did. Paul didn't like it. And so he tells Barnabas, heck no. Can I say heck here? Okay. Heck no. He cannot come. And then you fast forward to the end of Paul's life. And he's talking to Timothy. And he says, come as soon as you can, Timothy. And there's just a little phrase there. And you guys know how it goes. And bring Mark. And everybody's like, can you imagine if you've just been trotting along through these years with him, and all of a sudden you're like, did he say Mark? Mark? Eugene Peterson even put a little statement in, I can't remember where I read it, it's one of his books. Y'all obviously know I like Eugene Peterson. But somewhere in there he said, I wonder if he was not going to ask Mark to be his right-hand person. Good question. To me, that's a little more mature Paul. A Paul that's been willing to forgive. A Paul that's saying, I'm going to give you a second chance. Maybe Mark's grown up a little bit. Right? I'm glad for people who've given me a second chance, who haven't quit on me. The other story that as I was leaving today and to come here to put stuff on the board, it's funny how God does that. Being tired and doesn't have a lot of energy, and wishing I did, and trying not to beat myself up, saying, get up, go, run a block, something. Sharon goes, I really like it when you tell stories about your life because it encourages us. See if I get this right. It encourages us. It encourages us in our stories to hear your stories. And I said, I sometimes don't tell a lot of the stories because I really just want to point people to Jesus, but I realize that my life does that and can do that. So about 2 weeks ago, you guys know that my dad and my mom are divorced when I was 1 or 2, the different stories. And my dad was a race car driver in NASCAR, if you're familiar with that. So I didn't see him, and he wasn't around. He was married and had, I don't know, several times and other kids. And so I didn't see him, and he would just show up on occasions and be the Santa Claus dad, at Christmas. Sometimes, not always. So a couple weeks ago, I went back to see my dad, and I see him I try to go see him every year. He lives in Tennessee. For the longest time of my life, I wanted to be everything my parents weren't. So I was a driven 27-year-old with about 4 degrees, one being a seminary degree, a licensing counselor, and of course I got all kinds of pats on the back for that. But it was out of some wrong motives, which I'm not talking about that. Joey's going to talk about that. So frankly, I became a counselor for the wrong reasons. I became a graduate from a seminary for the wrong reasons. And of course, God, being God, can use all that, right? And he has. And none of it's been wasted. But my goal in life was to be what my parents weren't. I was going to have the right marriage. I was going to have the correct kids, and they were going to act the right way. I was going to have a job. I was going to be respected. I was going to this, and it just keeps on going. So a couple of weeks ago, I went back to see my dad, and he had heart surgery about 1.5 years ago, and I was there with him for that too. And so this time, I went back, and we were just sitting there talking, and he said to me, he has several kids, but no one talks to him except me, and he said, you've always been kind to me. It just kind of came out of the blue. We're just sitting there eating and talking about nothing, just, because you just talk about nothing. And I said, I was at the other end of the table, and I said, did you say kind? He said, yeah, you've always just been kind to me. And so I said, well, I don't feel like I've always been kind internally to you. Well, why do you say that? He said, you're my good kid. And everything in me wanted to dispute everything he was saying. Well, I'm not that good. You don't really know me, So, but I just said, well, thanks, Dad. I hope I'm kind. I want to be kind to you. And nothing else got said. Got ready to leave. And my dad's a very proud man. So he's not going to ask for anything. But I got ready to leave, and he said, hey, are we not doing a picture or something? That's what he said. We're not doing a picture or something like that? As if I was supposed to be doing that. And I said, well, we sure can do a picture. I'd love to have a picture, Dad. That'd be great. So he snapped a picture in his overalls and his flannel shirt and his boots that he wears every day. And it was my dad, just like my dad. And I got on the plane a couple of days later, and I was sitting there looking at that picture, and I thought, that's one of the first times that I've never had any angst in my heart. That I haven't had well, why were you not a dad to me? Why am I even coming to see you? You should be coming to see me. Those are things I never would say out loud, right? Because good Christian ladies don't do that. But those are things that would go through my mind and my heart. And it was a worshipful moment on that plane for me. No one else probably knew what was going on. I later told David, because he was with me, my husband, and he said, you are kind to your dad. And I said, I so hope I am. I want to be. And I think about that story, and I think, can I actually be a Christian? Tim Keller used to talk about this. He would say, people, if you know that name, Tim Keller, he would say, you don't understand the gospel if you don't forgive. My words are, I'm a clinging cymbal if I can't forgive. The other story I think about too,
Could you just say a little bit more about why you liked that when you were looking at the picture, what felt worshipful about it?
I knew you'd push me, Brian. I'm just kidding. I'm glad you asked. I was glad Sharon brought that up.
Could you just repeat the question?
Yeah, Brian just asked me if I could say some more about why that was worshipful to me when I was on the plane. Is that right? Yeah. I think it was worshipful because there's a sense of relinquishment. There's a sense that I was able to relinquish my dad from being something to me. And I could let him be who he is, in his overalls and his flannel shirt and his boots. Talking about NASCAR, which I don't know anything about NASCAR. But asking him questions about it because I know he'll talk about it. And saying, sure, Dad, I'd love to have a picture with you. Most of the time I probably would have gone, well, I guess. I thought, no, I'm a redeemed woman that's deeply loved by my Father. And I can say, no, Dad, I'd love to have a picture with you. And I have it, and I show it to people. And it's on my phone. And I was able to take that picture and turn to him and just say, I love you, Dad. So I got on that plane, and it was worshipful to me, between me and my Father, my Heavenly Father, because I think I brought him a little joy. And I'd like to think that my life does that sometimes. We're about out of time. I got a lot more stuff. Thank you for prompting that, Sharon, and good question. I'll just say this and try to wrap it up here in just a second. The other story that comes to mind for me, when peacemakers taking a risk, really is risky. One of the things that I like to, I'm going to flip back to Moses for just a second. Not that he was doing peacemaking, but when you lead, there's a willingness to be alone with the Father. And when those grumbling people were all grumbling, he was willing to be alone. He didn't pull on them to come through for him. He instead was patient with them. I think peacemaking is a way of being willing to be alone with the Father as well. Because often when I'm in the presence of my dad, I feel alone most of the time. Some of the people in this room probably know me better than my dad knows me. He knows I'm a good kid. I talk to a lot of people in the world. But he doesn't really know me. Doesn't ask questions. And so there's a willingness, and that's a spiritual barometer. I'm going off a tangent again. But the spiritual barometer is the willingness to be alone with the Father and not pull for somebody to come through for you. I think of Abigail in the Bible when I think of being a risk taker. Love the story. I have a daughter named Abigail, and that's why she was named that, one of the reasons. But I love that story because if you guys remember the story, and he was talking about David this morning. David could be impulsive. Not my husband. He can be impulsive. But King David, he could be impulsive at times. And he was angry. He had a lot of anger in him, and it would come out at times. And so here he is. If you know the story, I'll just go through it just real quickly. He's out in the field, and he sends for some food from Nabal, and he basically got mocked and laughed at and said no. So what does he tell his people? Strap on your swords. Put your armor on. We're going to go in and wipe them all out. So Abigail gets wind that that's what's happening. And she says, get the rice cakes. Get this and get this. Get it together real quick. Get me a donkey. And she rides out to meet David. I mean, it's not just anybody, right? It's David. And an army behind him. They have swords, yelling, loud. And here's this lady. I don't know if some of you got ladies, I don't like standing in front of a man's anger. I get put in that position quite often, but I don't know that I like it. I definitely probably wouldn't ride out to go for it. She does. And with great wisdom, she does it. When she was brave, courageous. And so she rides out there, and she doesn't just start yelling back at him, right? She didn't tell him, stop. You're a crazy man. That's what we women do sometimes. Stop it, you're a crazy man. She's very respectful.
We love it too.
I know. We get such a good response, right? But she gets down off of the donkey and she kneels. Remember? Yes. And he stops. That got his attention. Because he could have just ran right over her. Really. And it got his attention. And if you remember what she says, she calls something out in David. Is this really who you want to be? I love that. That's a beautiful picture of what a woman can be for a man. And how she did it was beautiful. Is this really what you want to be about, David? Because it really doesn't have to go that way. She called out what was most alive in him, which is a title that he got as a man after God's own heart. The rest of the story is he didn't go in and wipe out the town, and Nabal dies pretty immediately, and then he sends for Abigail, and she becomes one of his wives. But peacemaking requires a risk. And I bet she felt alone out there. But she was willing to go do that and risk something great. Paul Miller says this. Joey referred to this book, Love Walked Among Us. He says, Jesus is both the true peacemaker and the false peace breaker. I'll say it again. Jesus is both the true peacemaker and the false peace breaker. Jesus' angry honesty disrupts false peace. Being a peacemaker doesn't mean to not speak truth. It doesn't mean to build an illusion. It doesn't mean to deny truth. It means sometimes it will be a false peace breaker when you live in truth. I think the passage that I think sums up the idea of meekness and being a peacemaker is found in Philippians, and you guys are familiar with it. Philippians 2:3-8. I'm just going to read it to you, and I would just like you to maybe just close your eyes for and just listen as I read it. And just think about the idea of meekness and humility, being a peacemaker. How do those demonstrate love? And remembering what I've been given in terms of that. This is what Paul writes, which is, and when you're going to live as a meek person and a peacemaker, it's costly. And Paul says this, don't be selfish. Don't try to impress others. Be humble. Thinking of others as better than yourselves. Don't look out only for your own interests, but take an interest in other people. You're called to have the same attitude that Christ Jesus had. Be who he is. So though he was God, he did not think of equality with God as something to cling to. Instead, he gave up his divine privileges. He emptied himself out. He took the humble position of a slave, and he was born as a human being. And when he appeared in human form, he humbled himself in obedience to God. And then he died a criminal's death on a cross. Oh Lord, I pray that you would make us meek folks, meek people. I pray you would make us peacemakers. Thank you for the humble privilege it is to be part of furthering your kingdom. Remove anything in us, Lord, that would keep us from doing that. May we not be a hindrance or a roadblock, but may we be an ambassador that encompasses love and mercy and grace and meekness. May we give that away to folks as you've given it to us. For your glory. Amen.